Famous Jiggy Jaguar radio program.
Raw and uncut, Jiggy Jag, you know how he do it. You know what I'm saying? Keeping it all the way live.
Broadcasting live from Hutchinson, Kansas.
Well, I'm sitting here with a linguist. I had no idea. I didn't know you were, but I didn't know that you were a wordsmith.
Call Jiggy right now. 267-22-JIGGY.
Hey, Jiggy, what's happening, man? Reminds me of that David Bowie song. Jiggy play guitar. It's a great name, man. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Presenting
I'm Mike Massey, and you can catch me on Jiggy Jag TV and see a few of my trick shots there. Thanks very much.
Jiggy Jaguar.
I never knew what freedom was until I saw you lose yours.
Well. Welcome to the big broadcast. We are live coast to coast and border to border on iHeartRadio today. AMFM247.com. Linda Gordon is going to join us here in just a few moments. We are going to go live to Linda Gordon, and she will be with us here in just a few moments. Get a hold of us online at jiggyjaguar.com. Lots of things happening. So, we are going to go to Linda Gordon. She is going to be with us here in just a few seconds. Hopefully. Okay. Let's try Karen Cataline. I would much rather have Karen Cataline on first. Just because I would rather have Karen Cataline on first. Just the way it is. Karen Cataline is going to be our guest. Curious Cat. Oh, what is the world? What in the world? What a Skype name. What a Skype name, kids. Holy smokes. JiggyJaguar.com, by the way, is the official website. Go over and check out JiggyJaguar.com. The all-new JiggyJaguar.com coming very soon. Maybe. Okay, let's do this. Let's call Karen on the old skip. The old skip step. Skip Skype. That's what it is. The old skip Skype. Let me bring in our guest here. We have a tremendous guest with us. Linda Gordon is with us. She has a tremendous book. It is called The Second Coming of the KKK. It is an explosive investigation into the movement that defined Americanness and Unamericanness. And Linda, tell me and Don Mazzella and IQ a little bit about your book.
Well, to start, like a historian, I'll start from the chronological beginning.
Okay.
Most people know about the Ku Klux Klan that emerged in the South immediately after the Civil War. And that Klan was a secret terrorist group that over many decades did something like 4,000 lynchings of African Americans.
Wow.
For the purpose of intimidating all blacks not to try to ask for their rights. But very few people knew that in the 1920s in the North, another sort of part of the Klan, or rebirth of the Klan, which arose, and it was an entirely different beast. For one thing, it had somewhere between 3 and 5 million members. It was not at all secret. It included women, and probably the two major differences is that the 20s Klan was primarily nonviolent, with a few exceptions. But it turned its bigotry on Jews and Catholics. It remained racist about African Americans, but the people who organized it understood that in the 1920s, there just weren't that many African Americans living in the North, and so a movement based on that kind of racism would not have had much traction. So this, well, let me just stop there at this point and say it was striking to me that this very, very major development, the largest social movement of the 1920s by any count, wasn't as well known as it should have been.
So, is that what your book is primarily about? Is it about the 20s, or is
yes, it is about the 1920s. It is about what people call the Second Klan, but it is about the Klan as a mass social movement.
Well, you know, in 1966, in Shrewsbury, New Jersey, they held a Klan rally on exactly that issue.
Right.
And I remember that clear as day. I was sent out there to cover it. And you said it right. Catholics and Jews were their primary goal. But why do you think it appealed to so many people?
Well, look, I'm not a psychologist. I wish I could say it was exceptional, but unfortunately, I think one of the things that we know is that that kind of bigotry and racism can easily be sort of revved up and build a real anger, but that it also, it's usually based on fear. Now, you know, what you're talking about is what some people would call the third Klan. People talk about there being four clans. The original one in the South, the 1920s, is the second. What you're talking about is the third, a Klan that arose in opposition to the Civil Rights Movement. And then the fourth, which is what exists today as a part of the new white nationalist movement.
We have got a great guest with us today. Linda Gordon joins us. She has the Second Coming of the KKK. We also have Don Mazzella with us today, and Josh Bernstein just joined us. We also have IQ Al Rizzoli. So this book, the Second Coming of the KKK, why did you decide to write this book?
Actually, it was the first time and probably the last time I will write about anything so right-wing and so hateful. But I am in the midst of doing a larger book about social movement.
Okay.
And as I just mentioned, this was by far the largest social movement in the 1920s, and I didn't want, in my book on social movements, I didn't want people to think that all social movements were wonderful. So I thought I would take on this particular case.
Okay. Josh Bernstein, I don't know why I'm setting you up, sir, but do you have any questions for Linda? We'll start with you, and then we'll let Dawn and everybody else jump in.
First off, I joined the conversation late, so I didn't exactly get the gist of what she was referring to. If she's writing a book about current day racist movements.
No, it's a history book.
No, this is a history book.
And it's not what I'm writing now. It was published a couple years ago.
Okay.
This is about the 1920s and the second coming of the KKK. Dawn mentioned earlier that they what did they hold, a rally or something in New Jersey that you covered, sir?
Well, yeah, but as our guest is saying, it was the third Klan. I've always been under the impression that the Klan as an organization survived in the North almost up until the end of the century. I know they were in New Jersey, still clamoring around in 1996. When they went to Trenton to complain, but you're saying that there is in effect 4 clans. The first one in the South, the second one that you wrote about, and the third and the fourth. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes, that's right. And of course, the Klan never really went away. When we talk about there being 4 clans, we're talking about 4 moments in which the Klan really grew and became a major force. So I don't want you to think that there was ever a time that the Klan disappeared entirely.
No, I agree with you. But I guess my question, when I was doing research on Father Coughlin, I noticed in the pictures that oftentimes he was surrounded by Klansmen guarding him. Father Coughlin in the 20s and 30s was a very figure. Is that part of what you talk about? Or am I just jumping around?
No, that was in the 30s, and I actually happened to be writing about that at the moment. There were many of these fascist groups in America in the 1930s, and Father Coughlin's was one of the largest. And there is a relationship, so it's interesting that you brought that up, because many of these fascist groups grew out of people who either had been or still were in the Klan. But there's one thing that's really different. A lot of things that are different. But the main thing is that the American fascist groups were open admirers and supporters of Hitler and of Mussolini in Italy, and they openly used the term fascist for the kind of country that they wanted this to turn into.
So, IQ, do you have any questions for Linda while we have her here?
No, I'm listening because I didn't know about the one in the North. I heard about anti-Semitism, anti-Catholicism, but I didn't realize it was part and parcel of a Klan movement. Interesting, it really is. But the most interesting thing, the most important thing is that these movements are invariably started not by ordinary people, but by religious people, by people who are like priests or whatever.
Well, that's absolutely true of the Second Klan. The Second Klan was a movement of white evangelical Protestants. But interestingly enough, it was not true of any of the other clans. The first terrorist Klan did not have a religious ideology. The fascists were not particularly religious, and certainly the clans that arose in opposition to the civil rights movement did not. So it is true that I certainly agree with you that especially conservative forms of Christianity are often close to these really right-wing movements, but it was really the real religiosity was only true in the 1920s. And just one little point, a fact about that might give you a sense of the scale. The Ku Klux Klan of the 1920s had 40,000 minister members, and these were ministers who openly praised the Klan in their sermons and encouraged people to join the Klan.
Wow. This is just terribly fascinating here. We've got the author of The Second Coming of the KKK, Linda Gordon, with us today. Now, Linda, how do we get your book?
Oh, it's easily available in Amazon or in many bookstores. It's available in paperback or hardback. Not hard to find.
Awesome.
Linda, if I could ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
In talking and in doing your research, do you have any feeling as to why people joined the Klan in those days? I mean, I know why they did it in the third and the fourth, but why this anger against Jews and Catholics?
Well, what the Klan would say is that Jews and Catholics were not capable of being patriotic Americans. The Catholics, because they owed their primary allegiance to the Pope. And Jews, because I don't know if you've heard about this famous forgery known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, but the idea was that there was this secret international conspiracy of Jewish bankers who were determined to rule the world. But, you know, as to why people join, one of the things I've had to give a lot of thought to is conspiracy theories. You know, today in the United States, as you may be aware, there are people who believe in conspiracy theories that to many of us would be immediately seem completely absurd. One answer to your question about who joins is that whether you believe in these conspiracy theories may have to do with where you hear them from. That's why the ministers were so important, and I'm so glad to have that question about religion, because people trusted their ministers. They also had, and they still have today, there's a kind of circular reasoning. If you try to say about some conspiracy theory, well, what's your evidence? They would then say, oh, well, of course, there is no evidence because conspiracies are, of course, secret. So they have you sort of in a complete circle there where you cannot challenge them. The last thing I would say, and I mentioned before, I'm no psychologist. I haven't done any studies of what differentiates people who believe this stuff and people who don't. But I think one of the things we've seen recently is, unfortunately, how easy it is to take people's kind of ordinary fears and anxieties and direct them, rev them up into a rage at whatever groups they see as the non-dominant groups that are challenging them.
Well, the Nazis did it very well. It wasn't very far away.
They did well, you said?
Yes.
Yes,
by indoctrinating 60 million Germans, civilized human beings, and turn them into monsters in 6 years.
Absolutely. Although there is a big difference between that and the Klan, I want to point out, and that is, of course, and I realize that you know this, is that the 1920s Klan was non-violent, whereas, of course, European fascism, whether you're talking about Germany or Italy or even Japan, was an extremely militaristic and in many, to some extent, ruled through intimidating people. The 1920s Klan did not do that, and to me, it's all the more interesting that it could do that. For example, it was primarily an electoral organization. It elected 11 governors and something like 65 congressmen.
Wow.
And these were people who ran openly, either as Klan members or as Klan supporters.
Yeah, because didn't what was it? Strom Thurmond? What was
Robert
it?
Byrd?
Yeah. There's a lot
Most
of
the
them.
Democrats.
Well, that too. That's something else, Linda. Why is it that the Klan is one of those groups that it didn't matter if it was a lot of them were Democrats, a lot of them were Republicans. Why did both sides kind of join up with the Klan?
Yeah,
it's so
that's
strange.
A really good question. I think a lot of people forget that in the 1920s, the difference between the Democratic and Republican Party was very different than today, right? Today we think of the Democratic Party as more liberal and the Republican Party as more conservative. That was not true in the 1920s. For one thing, the South, with its commitment to maintaining race segregation at all costs, that South was pretty much 100% Democratic. And of course, only white people could vote because black people had been completely disfranchised. But what you're saying is absolutely correct. The Klan drew support from both parties.
Yeah. Josh, jump in there. I know you probably got some questions for her. You're a history guy.
I have found in life that typically there's usually no coincidences. Referring to conspiracy theory, that was a tool developed and created by the CIA in the Kennedy days, where anyone that did not believe the quote official narrative of the Warren Commission on the assassination of JFK was considered at that time to be known as a conspiracy theorist. Yeah. They were marginalized. They were, ridiculed. They were put back into the corner as, you're crazy and you don't know what you're talking about. But I have found that sometimes, and this happens a lot, the craziest things that you hear, most people would think, oh, well, then that just possibly cannot be true, are typically true. Because I've always said, the crazier a story sounds, the more likely it is true. And I, as an investigative reporter who doesn't do conspiracy theories, that does only pure investigative work with real sources, have found myself reporting on things where people said, oh, that just can't be true. And it is true. And it happens a lot. And so I want to just touch on that. And then, of course, I did not catch the earlier part of your interview. But from what I gather, it was the Southern Democrats that were the ones that were racist towards blacks, towards Jews, towards other minorities. And the fact is that they are the ones that considered blacks to be 3/5 of a person. They are the ones that passed the Jim Crow laws. They are the ones that did segregation. So ultimately, it was the Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats, if you will, that in turn were the most racist.
Let me just interrupt you for a minute. I understand what you're saying, but what unfortunately it is not true about the Klan in the 1920s. The Klan in the 1920s, for example, almost never mentioned African Americans. And on the other hand, the original Klan almost never mentioned Jews or Catholics as enemies. So the spirit may be the same between those two, but the targets were quite different.
Right. And I think most people that understand the Ku Klux Klan as far as a entity and a group probably feel and understand it the way that I understand it, that the racism and using of a perfectly peaceful flag, the rebel flag, and turning it into a symbol of hate instead of a symbol of state rights, which is what it always has been. I think that in the 60s, around that time, is when the nastiness or the violent rhetoric and actions of the KKK were prevalent, and that's where most people in American society, certainly conservatives, see that as the stalwart of where it kind of began. But what you're saying is that it began way before that, and it's had different transgressions moving forward through history. That, I will be honest, I did not know. I've always thought of the Klan as just being Southern Democrats that hate Jews and blacks.
Yeah, what do you make of that, Linda?
Well, just like I said, the Klan has many reappearances, and it tends to be a little different each time. The spirit, I think, is the same. I think it's important to understand, though, that, for example, today, among the white nationalist groups, there is a Ku Klux Klan, but it is just one among many, many small, fragmented groups.
Yeah.
Similarly, hello.
No, you're good. You're good there.
Sorry
you're
about
good
that.
there.
That was my phone. No. My ringtone. Take down the CCP.
Okay.
You're
what
good,
I was
Linda.
Say is, during the civil rights movement, there was a very small Klan, but the organization that really pushed forward what you might call the Klanish agenda was an organization called the White Citizens Council, and they were councils that were resisting the desegregation of the schools.
Right. Do you find? Let me ask you this: do you find it interesting now that white Americans, white liberal apologists for slavery, shall we say, now are trying to segregate their classrooms? You've seen this on college campuses. You've seen this in high schools.
Where do you find liberals who are defending slavery? That is completely
No. I said white apologists. In other words, they basically feel as though they're now segregating. In other words, blacks fought for many, many years to not be segregated, and now it's turned the opposite to where blacks are now wanting to be segregated. And they're using white liberal professors and teachers as their way to do it. So I think that's interesting. And the other thing you talked about is the second.
I don't see it the way you do, unfortunately.
So where is your next book going to come against Antifa thugs and the fact that they are the most dangerous with the BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, which are basically